The sprawling Houston mansion of Richard Hargrove felt more like a mausoleum than a home as the family gathered for the reading of his will. Generations of oil money and Texas pride seemed to seep from the mahogany walls, watching as the Hargrove clan assembled, each with their own carefully calculated expectation. I, Thomas Hargrove, the black sheep of the family at 32, sat quietly in the corner. A history professor who had deliberately carved a path far from the family's oil empire. I was the perpetual disappointment, the son who chose books over barrels, academia over assets. My cousin Blake, heir apparent to the Hargrove energy, lounged near the front of the room with the confidence of someone who knew exactly how the world worked. At 35, he was everything the family wanted. Sharp dress, MBA from Harvard, poised to take over the family's multi-generational oil business. "I've been running the preliminary numbers," Blake announced loudly to anyone who would listen. "With the current market and our existing contracts, I'm looking at inheriting roughly $60 million, plus controlling interest in Hargrove Energy." His wife Jennifer, draped in designer labels, nodded approvingly. His sister Melissa exchanged a knowing glance, her own expectations equally calculated. Our Aunt Margaret, Richard's sister and the family matriarch, watched with a curious expression, part amusement, part something else I couldn't quite read. Jonathan Myers, the family's attorney for over 3 decades, entered the room carrying a leather briefcase that looked like it had witnessed countless family dramas. His carefully neutral expression gave nothing away. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "we are here to read the last will and testament of Richard Hargrove." Blake leaned forward, a predatory smile playing at the corners of his mouth. The room seemed to hold its breath, the air thick with anticipation of what everyone assumed would be a straightforward transfer of wealth and power. Little did they know that the final line of the will would change everything. The first hour of reading confirmed most expectations. Specific amounts were allocated, property divided, investments distributed. Blake's smug expression grew with each mention of his substantial inheritance. "And now," Jonathan said, adjusting his glasses, the final paragraph. A moment of silence, then words that would shatter the carefully constructed Hargrove world forever. Jonathan's voice was steady as he read the final paragraph, each word landing like a precision-guided missile in the heart of the family's expectations. "To my nephew Blake Hargrove," he read, "I leave nothing. Not because you are unworthy, but because the truth about your parentage must finally be revealed." The room went silent, Blake's face drained of color. "Pursuant to confidential DNA testing conducted 2 years before my death, I discovered that Blake is not my biological nephew. He is the product of an affair between my late wife and another man, a fact known only to me until this moment." Melissa gasped. Jennifer's perfectly manicured hand flew to her mouth. Aunt Margaret's expression remained unreadable. "Furthermore," Jonathan continued, "the true heir to the Hargrove fortune is Thomas, my biological grandson, whose existence was hidden to protect him from the family's toxic dynamics." I felt the weight of 32 years of separation, of being the perpetual outsider, suddenly shift. Blake erupted. "This is impossible. A lie. I demand proof." Jonathan calmly produced a folder. "Here are the complete DNA test results, certified by 3 separate laboratories. Richard had these verified extensively before his death. The documents revealed a complex story. My mother, Richard's daughter, whom the family had effectively erased after a falling out decade earlier, had been secretly supported by Richard. My existence had been carefully protected, my academic career subtly funded through anonymous scholarships and grants. Why would he do this?" Melissa demanded, her perfectly controlled world crumbling. Aunt Margaret spoke for the first time. "Because blood is not about genetics. It's about who truly carries the family's values." Blake's entire identity seemed to be disintegrating. A Harvard MBA, groomed for years to inherit the Hargrove energy empire, suddenly found himself completely disinherited. "There are additional conditions," Jonathan added, looking directly at me. "Thomas, to inherit, must agree to use a significant portion of the fortune to transform Hargrove Energy into a sustainable energy company, moving away from traditional oil into renewable technologies." My academic background and environmental history suddenly took on a profoundly personal significance. The lawyer continued, "Failure to do so will result in the entire fortune being donated to climate research organization." Blake looked like he might physically attack someone. Jennifer was already mentally calculating their financial destruction. "This can't be legal," Blake sputtered. "Oh, it's entirely legal," Aunt Margaret said coolly. "Richard spent 2 years with the best lawyers in Texas ensuring every possible challenge would fail." I sat in shock. the weight of a multi-generational oil fortune, and the responsibility to transform it suddenly landing in my lap. My entire life had been a carefully constructed protection, a secret waiting to be revealed at the exact right moment. The Hargrove world would never be the same. The hours following the will reading were a hurricane of emotions and legal machination. Blake's attempts to challenge the inheritance were systematically dismantled by Jonathan Myers, who seemed to have anticipated every potential legal maneuver. The DNA evidence is irrefutable, Jonathan explained during a private meeting in his office. Richard spent 2 years meticulously documenting everything: blood tests, genealogical research, even private investigator reports. My Aunt Margaret joined us, her composure a stark contrast to Blake's earlier emotional breakdown. "Your mother was Richard's greatest disappointment and his greatest pride," she revealed. "She refused to be controlled by the family's expectations, just as you have." The story emerged in fragments. My mother, Elena, had been Richard's only daughter, brilliant, rebellious, who had walked away from the family fortune after a massive argument about the environmental impact of their oil business. She'd become an environmental journalist, dedicating her life to exposing corporate ecological damage. Richard was secretly proud of her, Margaret explained, but family pride and ego prevented him from publicly supporting her work. So he found other ways: anonymous scholarships, ensuring her research was published, protecting her from the family's potential retaliation. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Welcome to the family. Real family, not the one you thought you knew." The Hargrove Energy headquarters became a battleground. Blake and his allies attempted to block my inheritance through every possible corporate mechanism, but Richard had been 3 steps ahead, creating legal structures that made direct challenges nearly impossible. Dr. Miranda Chun, a renowned environmental technology expert, arrived unexpectedly at my university office. "Your grandfather selected me years ago," she explained, producing a detailed proposal for transforming Hargrove Energy. "These technologies could revolutionize sustainable energy," she said, spreading out complex technical documents. Richard knew the oil industry was dying. He wanted to ensure the family's legacy would be about solutions, not destruction. The proposal was breathtaking, a comprehensive plan to convert the family's oil infrastructure into a cutting-edge renewable energy company. Solar, wind, and breakthrough battery storage technologies that could transform the energy landscape. Blake's desperate attempts to maintain the old order became increasingly frantic. He leaked stories to business media, tried to turn family members against me, launched multiple legal challenges, but each attempt failed. Richard had constructed his final act with the same strategic precision he'd used to build the family fortune. An encrypted email arrived from a secure server. Internal documents revealing decades of environmental violations by Hargrove Energy documents my mother had likely been collecting, now part of my inheritance. "You have a choice," the email. "Expose the past or transform the future." Margaret visited my small university apartment, bringing a leather-bound journal. "Richard's final instructions," she said. "Not just about the business, about understanding who you really are." The Journal revealed a complex mana-titan of the oil industry who had grown to understand the destruction his business had caused. A man who had spent his final years planning not just a financial inheritance, but a moral one. "He wanted you to have the opportunity he never allowed himself," Margaret, "to change everything." My phone rang. Blake's number. "This isn't over," he snarled. "No," I replied calmly. "It's just beginning." The Hargrove legacy was about to be rewritten, and I was going to be the one holding the pen. The first board meeting of Hargrove Energy felt like walking into a carefully orchestrated ambush. The mahogany-paneled boardroom on the 50th floor of Hargrove Tower had been my grandfather's domain for decades. And now, every portrait on the wall seemed to watch me with judging eyes. Blake had positioned his allies strategically around the table, men and women who'd spent years benefiting from the old power structure. Their Rolex watches and Hermes ties marked them as members of Houston's energy elite, people who saw environmental concerns as irritating obstacles to profit. Dr. Miranda Chun stood beside me, her tablet containing a presentation that would shatter their comfortable worldview. The sophisticated graphics showed how the company's existing oil field infrastructure could be repurposed for geothermal and solar energy production, a transformation worth billions. "Before we begin," Blake interrupted, his Harvard MBA confidence on full display, "I think we need to address the elephant in the room." A history professor with no business experience cannot possibly understand the complexities of running an energy company. Several board members nodded in agreement. This was clearly a rehearsed moment, Blake's first move in what he thought would be a quick corporate coup. I took a deep breath, remembering my grandfather's words from his private journals. The old guard will resist. Let them show their hand first. You're right, Blake, I said, watching confusion flicker across his face. A history professor might struggle with energy company logistics, but someone who understands how technological transitions have shaped civilization, someone who studied how societies either adapt or collapse based on their relationship with energy resources, that person might have exactly the perspective this company needs. Dr. Chun stepped forward, bringing up the first slide of our presentation. Hargrove Energy sits at a crossroads, she began. Our preliminary analysis shows that 78% of our current oil extraction infrastructure can be converted to geothermal and solar energy production within 5 years. The numbers appeared on screen. Profit projections that made several board members sit up straighter. This wasn't just environmental idealism, this was serious business. Impossible, Blake scoffed, but there was a hint of uncertainty in it. The conversion costs alone would be offset by the proprietary technologies developed in secret by Richard Hargrove over the past 15 years, I interrupted, nodding to Dr. Chun to show the next slide. Technologies that are now legally under my control. The room fell silent as patent documents and research data filled the screen. My grandfather's hidden work years of preparation for this exact moment. These patents, Dr. Chun explained, represent breakthrough advances in renewable energy storage and distribution. The market value of the intellectual property alone exceeds $12 billion. Blake's face had turned an interesting shade of red. This clearly wasn't how he'd expected the meeting to go. Furthermore, I continued, we've already secured preliminary commitments from 3 major tech companies interested in partnering on implementation. They see what some in this room apparently don't, that the future of energy isn't in extraction, it's in innovation. An encrypted message appeared on my phone. Watch Blake's left hand. He's holding something. I glanced over just in time to see Blake pull out what looked like a court order, his trump card. None of that matters, he announced with renewed confidence. I have here an injunction questioning the validity of the will's technology transfer until this is resolved in court. All patent control remains with the current board. This was the moment my grandfather had prepared me for. I nodded to Jonathan Myers, who had been sitting quietly in the corner. Actually, the lawyer said, standing, we anticipated this move. He opened his briefcase and distributed documents to each board member. These papers show that Richard Hargrove legally transferred all relevant patents to a separate trust 5 years ago. A trust controlled exclusively by Thomas, established long before the will and completely independent from it. The look on Blake's face was priceless. He'd played what he thought was his ace, only to discover he wasn't even in the right game. There's more, I added, motioning to Dr. Chun. The next slides revealed environmental impact studies of current Hargrove operation studies that had been quietly commissioned by my grandfather. Converting to renewable energy isn't just about future profits, I explained. It's about avoiding massive liability. These reports document environmental damage that could expose the company to billions in future lawsuits. Several board members began whispering among themselves. They were business people first and foremost. Threat of liability was something they understood viscerally. This is absurd, Blake stood, his carefully maintained composure cracking. You can't just walk in here and I can and I am, I cut him off. But not alone. I pressed a button on my phone and the large screen at the end of the boardroom came to life. Faces appeared. Leaders from major environmental organizations, tech company CEOs, even 2 prominent senators, all expressing support for Hargrove Energy's transformation. Ladies and gentlemen of the board, I said, standing to my full height, you have a choice to make today. You can resist this change and be remembered as the last defenders of a dying industry. Or you can be part of one of the most significant corporate transformations in history. The room was silent for a long moment. Blake looked around desperately for support, but found mostly thoughtful faces considering the implications of what they'd heard. I moved to support the proposed transition plan, said Margaret, a board member I'd never met but who had apparently been one of my grandfather's secret allies. We can either lead this change or be crushed by it. Second, came another voice. Blake watched his support crumble in real time. This isn't over, he snarled, gathering his papers. There are other ways to fight this. Yes, I agreed calmly. There are. and my grandfather prepared for all of them. I held up a USB drive. Would you like to see what else is in his files, Blake? Should we discuss the offshore accounts? The environmental violations you personally approved? He froze, fear finally breaking through his anger. That won't be necessary, Jonathan Myers intervened smoothly. I'm sure Mr. Blake will take time to reconsider his position. As the board meeting concluded with a preliminary vote supporting the transition plan, my phone buzzed again. Phase 1, complete. But watch your back. Blake won't give up, I looked out the boardroom's floor-to-ceiling windows at the Houston skyline, thinking about how one old man's vision was about to transform not just a company, but an entire industry. The real work was just beginning. The transformation of Hargrove Energy into a sustainable technology company was more than a business. Move It was a generational reckoning. My mother, Elena, became a key strategic advisor, her years of environmental journalism providing critical insights. Your grandfather was watching, she told me during a private meeting. He knew the oil industry was dying long before anyone else admitted it. Encrypted files began arriving from secure servers decades of research my grandfather had secretly compiled about sustainable energy technologies. Each document revealed a man far more complex than the oil baron the world had known. Dr. Miranda Chun's team began integrating these hidden technologies into our new business model. Solar collection systems that were decades ahead of current market offerings. Battery storage technologies that could revolutionize renewable energy infrastructure. Blake's attempts to undermine the transition became increasingly desperate. He leaked stories to business media, tried to turn family members against me, launched multiple legal challenges, but each attempt failed. Richard had constructed his final act with the same strategic precision he'd used to build the family fortune. An unexpected ally emerged in the form of International Environmental Organization. The technologies hidden within Hargrove's archives were potentially world-changing solutions to energy challenges that could transform entire continent. Your grandfather was preparing for this moment for years, Jonathan Myers revealed during a private meeting. He knew the future of energy wasn't about extraction. It was about restoration. The first international conference presenting Hargrove's sustainable technologies became a global event. The technologies we unveiled were so advanced that they drew immediate interest from governments and environmental organizations worldwide. These aren't just energy solutions, I explained to the gathered international press. They're a blueprint for environmental restoration. Blake's final attempt to challenge the inheritance came during the conference. He attempted to present alternative documentation challenging the will's legitimacy, but Richard had been 3 steps ahead. Comprehensive legal documentation, DNA evidence, and a meticulously constructed inheritance strategy made Blake's challenges impossible. A mysterious USB drive arrived at my office, containing additional research my grandfather had compiled. Technologies that went far beyond energy-comprehensive environmental restoration systems that could potentially reverse decades of ecological damage. Some inheritances, a note with the drive read, are about more than money. They're about possibility. My Aunt Margaret's intervention was subtle but powerful. She had been quietly building support among industry leaders, positioning the Hargrove transformation as a visionary move. Your grandfather always believed the true measure of wealth wasn't what you accumulated, she told me, but what you returned to the world. The final board meeting of the year was a moment of triumph. The technologies developed under my leadership had already demonstrated potential to address global environmental challenges. My phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. The first phase is complete. The real work continues. As night fell over Houston, I reflected on the journey. The inheritance was never just about money or a company. It was a mission, a responsibility passed down through generations, carefully protected, and now fully real. The real work was just beginning. The United Nations Climate Action Summit became the proving ground for Hargrove's sustainable technologies. The technologies we presented were so advanced that they created an immediate global sensation. These aren't just energy solutions, I explained to the gathered international delegates. They're a comprehensive approach to environmental restoration. Dr. Miranda Chun presented the scientific data. Entire ecosystems could be rehabilitated. Communities struggling with environmental challenges were finding new hope. Blake's final attempt to disrupt the presentation was swiftly neutralized. International scientific support and the clear humanitarian potential of our technologies created an impenetrable shield against his machinations. An encrypted communication network my grandfather had secretly established began revealing its true purpose. Hidden within the technology archives were not just energy solutions, but a comprehensive global environmental restoration strategy. Your grandfather was building something far larger than a company, Elena revealed during a private briefing. He was creating a global infrastructure for environmental protection. The technologies went far beyond energy management, climate change mitigation, ecosystem restoration, sustainable urban development. The potential was exponential. Unexpected allies emerged. A global network of environmental researchers and community leaders who had been quietly supported by my grandfather's strategic planning over decades became vocal advocates. Margaret Hargrove saw something most people missed, one researcher told me. Environmental protection isn't about individual technologies. It's about creating interconnected systems that can transform how we interact with our planet. The family dynamics continued to shift. Aunt Margaret became a critical strategic advisor, her understanding of the family's complex history providing crucial context. Richard always believed that true inheritance wasn't money, she explained. It was the responsibility to create meaningful change. Blake's attempts to challenge the inheritance through legal channels had completely collapsed. His reputation in business circles was in tatters, while I was being celebrated as a visionary leader. A breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Additional research archives revealed that my grandfather had been preparing this transition for decades, carefully positioning technologies and building a global network of support. Some truths take generations to emerge, Jonathan Myers told me, presenting additional documents. Your grandfather understood that true change requires patience and strategic planning. The UN summit concluded with unprecedented international interest in Hargrove sustainable technologies. Delegates from over 50 countries approached to discuss implementation of our environmental restoration technology. My phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. The legacy continues. During a private moment, my mother shared a final piece of the puzzle. Your grandfather understood that the right inheritance isn't about money or assets. It's about creating the conditions for meaningful change. As the summit concluded, I reflected on the journey. The inheritance was never just about a company or wealth. It was a mission, a responsibility carefully protected and passed down through generations. Standing on that global stage, I finally understood the true nature of inheritance. It wasn't about what you receive, but what you choose to do with it. My grandfather had seen something in me that the rest of the family had missed. Not just the ability to manage a business, but the vision to transform a mission into global change. Some inheritances come with responsibilities you can't imagine, and the real work is always just beginning. 5 years after inheriting Hargrove Sustainable Technologies, I stood in the newly constructed Environmental Research Center that bore my grandfather's name. What had once been the company's primary oil refinery was now a state-of-the-art facility dedicated to environmental restoration technology. Blake's final fate had been both tragic and telling. Stripped of his business reputation, he had become a cautionary tale in corporate circles, the heir who lost everything by failing to adapt. Dr. Miranda Chun, now the Chief Scientific Officer, presented our latest breakthrough. These restoration technologies can rehabilitate ecosystems damaged by decades of industrial activity, she explained during a global conference. We're not just mitigating damage, we're reversing it. The technologies developed by Hargrove had transformed entire regions, water systems restored, damaged landscapes rehabilitated, communities given new hope. An unexpected invitation arrived from the White House. Our environmental restoration technologies had caught the attention of federal environmental agencies. A comprehensive national strategy was being developed based on our research. Your grandfather saw this coming decades ago, Elena told me during a private dinner. He understood that the future of energy wasn't about extraction. It was about restoration. Aunt Margaret had become a key advisor to environmental policymakers. Her understanding of both business and environmental strategy provided a unique perspective that was increasingly valued. Richard always believed that true wealth wasn't about accumulation, she explained. It was about creating systems that could solve critical global challenges. The family dynamics had transformed completely. What had once been a cutthroat competition for inheritance had become a collaborative mission to create meaningful change. International recognition continued to grow. The United Nations had cited Hargrove's sustainable technologies as a model for corporate environmental responsibility. Our technologies were being implemented in regions facing critical environmental challenges. A mysterious archive continued to reveal my grandfather's strategic planning, hidden research, carefully preserved technologies, a global network of environmental researchers and community leaders who had been quietly supported for decades. Some inheritances, a note in the archives read, are about more than money. They're about possibility. My phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. The legacy continues. During a private moment, Jonathan Myers shared a final insight. Your grandfather understood something most people missed, he said. True leadership isn't about control. It's about creating the conditions for meaningful change. Standing in the research center, surrounded by technologies that could transform our relationship with the planet, I reflected on the journey. The inheritance was never just about a company or wealth. It was a mission, a responsibility carefully protected and passed down through generations. Some inheritances come with responsibilities you can't imagine, and the real work is always just beginning. 10 years after the life-changing will reading, the Hargrove legacy had been completely transformed. What was once a traditional oil empire was now a global leader in environmental restoration and sustainable technologies. The annual shareholders meeting was a far cry from the cutthroat family gatherings of the past. Representatives from indigenous communities, environmental organizations, and global scientific institutions sat alongside traditional business leaders. Our technologies have now restored over 2.3 million acres of damaged ecosystems, I announced, presenting the company's annual report. We're not just mitigating environmental damage, we're reversing decades of industrial destruction, Dr. Miranda. Chun unveiled our most groundbreaking project yet, a comprehensive ecosystem restoration technology that could potentially rehabilitate entire regions devastated by climate change and industrial activity. Blake, now working as a mid-level consultant for an environmental nonprofit, sat in the back of the room. His fall from grace had been complete, but there was a hint of redemption in his current work. An encrypted message arrived on my secure phone. The final phase begins. The Hargrove Archives, a massive collection of research, technologies, and strategic documents my grandfather had carefully preserved, continued to reveal unexpected treasures. Each discovery seemed to peel back another layer of his complex vision. Richard was playing a much longer game than anyone realized, Jonathan Myers explained during a private meeting. These technologies, these research networks, they were decades in the making. My mother Alina had become a critical voice in global environmental policy. Her years of investigative journalism, combined with the Hargrove technological innovations, created a powerful platform for change. Your grandfather understood something most people missed, she told me. Environmental restoration isn't just about technology. It's about reimagining our relationship with the planet. The international recognition continued to grow. The United Nations had cited Hargrove's sustainable technologies as the primary model for corporate environmental transformation. Our technologies were being implemented in regions facing critical environmental challenges across 6 continents. Aunt Margaret, now in her late 70s, remained a strategic advisor. Her understanding of both family dynamics and global environmental strategies provided unique insights. True inheritance, she often said, isn't about money. It's about the possibility of change. A breakthrough came from an unexpected source. The hidden technologies in the Hargrove archives revealed potential solutions to water scarcity that could transform entire regions of the planet. My phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. The legacy continued. The real work is just beginning. The annual family gathering had transformed from a tense inheritance battle to a collaborative mission. Blake, Elena, Margaret, and I now work together in ways that would have been unimaginable a decade earlier. Some inheritances, a note in the archives read, are about more than money. They're about reimagining what's possible. Standing in the research center that had once been an oil refinery, I reflected on the journey. The inheritance was never just about a company or wealth. It was a mission, a responsibility carefully protected and passed down through generations. My grandfather had seen something in me that the rest of the family had missed. Not just the ability to manage a business, but the vision to transform a mission into global change. Some inheritances come with responsibilities you can't imagine, and the real work is always just beginning. The Hargrove Environmental Research Center had become a global beacon of hope. What was once a family secret was now a transformative force addressing critical global challenges. An invitation arrived from the White House, a comprehensive national strategy for environmental restoration was being developed, with Hargrove Technologies at its core. The technologies my grandfather had carefully preserved were now becoming a blueprint for global environmental policy. Your grandfather was playing a chess game that spanned decades, Dr. Miranda Chun explained during a strategy session. These technologies weren't just about business. They were about creating a fundamental shift in how we interact with our planet. The hidden archives continued to reveal my grandfather's extraordinary vision. Decades of research, carefully preserved technologies, a global network of environmental researchers and community leaders who had been quietly supported for years. Blake's transformation completed a remarkable family journey. From the heir apparent cutoff from inheritance to a dedicated environmental consultant, he had found a form of redemption in the mission my grandfather had set in motion. "I was so focused on what I was losing," Blake admitted during a family gathering, "that I couldn't see what we were gaining." Elena's investigative journalism background proved crucial in documenting and sharing the technology's impact. Her work ensured that the Hargrove legacy wasn't just about technological innovation, but about telling the stories of environmental restoration. "Richard understood something most people missed," she told. "Technology isn't just about solving problems. It's about changing how we see our relationship with the planet." The international recognition continued to grow. The United Nations cited Hargrove's sustainable technologies as the primary model for corporate environmental transformation. Our technologies were now being implemented in regions facing critical environmental challenges across multiple continents. Aunt Margaret, now in her 80s, remained a strategic advisor. Her understanding of both family dynamics and global environmental strategies provided unique insights that continued to shape our approach. "True power," she often said, "isn't about control. It's about creating possibilities." An unexpected breakthrough emerged from the hidden archives, technologies that went far beyond environmental restoration potential solutions to global challenges that my grandfather had been developing in secret for decades. My phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. The legacy continues. The real work is just beginning. The annual family gathering had transformed completely. What was once a battlefield of inheritance had become a collaborative mission to create meaningful global change. International scientific conferences now featured the Hargrove technologies as a primary case study in corporate environmental transformation. The technologies we had inherited were reshaping how entire industries approached environmental responsibility. Some inheritances, a note in the archives read, are about more than money. They're about reimagining what's possible. Standing in the research center that had once been an oil refinery, I reflected on the journey. The inheritance was never just about a company or wealth. It was a mission, a responsibility carefully protected and passed down through generations. My grandfather had seen something in me that the rest of the family had missed. Not just the ability to manage a business, but the vision to transform a mission into global change. Some inheritances come with responsibilities you can't imagine, and the real work is always just beginning. The final revelation came 15 years after that fateful will reading, during a global environmental summit that would change everything. Hargrove Sustainable Technologies had become more than a company. It was a global movement for environmental restoration. Dr. Miranda Chun stood beside me, preparing to present our most groundbreaking technology yet, a comprehensive ecosystem restoration system that could potentially reverse decades of environmental damage. The presentation would be broadcast to world leaders, scientific institutions, and environmental organizations globally. An encrypted message arrived moments before we took the stage. Everything Richard prepared is about to be revealed. The presentation began with a comprehensive overview of our technologies. But as we reached the final section, something extraordinary happened. Hidden within our presentation were layers of technological innovations that went far beyond what anyone had anticipated. These aren't just environmental restoration technology, I explained to the stunned global audience. These are comprehensive planetary healing systems developed Over decades of secret research, the technologies were breathtaking. Methods to restore oceanic ecosystems, reverse desertification, clean atmospheric carbon at unprecedented rates. My grandfather had been preparing these solutions for decades, waiting for the right moment to reveal them. Backstage, Jonathan Myers approached with a final set of documents. Richard's last instruction, he said quietly, to be revealed only when the world was ready to receive it. The documents revealed a network of environmental researchers, community leaders, and scientific institutions that my grandfather had been quietly supporting for decades. A global infrastructure for environmental transformation that had been carefully constructed in secret. My mother, Elena, now a senior advisor to international environmental policy, understood the significance immediately. He was building something far larger than a company, she whispered. He was creating a global restoration strategy. Blake, who had transformed from a corporate heir to a dedicated environmental consultant, watched from the wings. His journey from antagonist to ally was complete. As the presentation concluded, the global response was unprecedented. World leaders, scientific institutions, and environmental organizations immediately began requesting implementation strategies for the Hargrove technologies. Some inheritances, a final note from my grandfather read, are about more than money. They're about saving the planet. My phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. The legacy is now fully revealed. The real work begins. The technologies went far beyond environmental restoration. They represented a fundamental reimagining of humanity's relationship with the planet's solutions that could potentially reverse decades of environmental destruction. Aunt Margaret, watching from the front row, smiled with the satisfaction of a plan decades in the making. Richard always played the longest game, she said quietly. As the summit concluded, international delegates from over 50 countries approached to discuss implementation of our technologies. What had once been a closely held family secret was now a global solution to critical environmental challenges. Standing on that global stage, I finally understood the true nature of inheritance. It wasn't about what you receive, but what you choose to do with it. My grandfather had seen something in me that the rest of the family had missed, not just the ability to manage a business, but the vision to transform a mission into global change. Some inheritances come with responsibilities you can't imagine, and the real work is always just beginning. The standing ovation in the United Nations Hall lasted for nearly 15 minutes. An unprecedented response that felt less like applause and more like a collective sigh of relief from a world desperate for hope. Leaders who had spent years locked in contentious climate negotiations now embraced each other, their faces alight with a new sense of possibility. As I stepped down from the stage, I was immediately surrounded. The German chancellor, known for her stoicism, grasped my hand with both of hers, tears in her eyes. "This is what we have been waiting for," she said. "A path forward that is not based on compromise and incrementalism, but on genuine transformation." My mother appeared at my side, her serene expression failing to mask the immense pride in her eyes. "He did it," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. After all these years, my father finally made his case to the world. The media firestorm was immediate and all-encompassing. News outlets that had been covering geopolitical conflicts and economic crises suddenly had a new headline: The Hargrove Revelation, a path to planetary healing. The evidence my grandfather's network had released simultaneously created an undeniable narrative. Companies that had spent decades lobbying against climate action were now facing public outrage and shareholder rebellion. Their stocks plummeted as Hargrove, Sustainable Technologies, and the newly formed Global Restoration Coalition became the most talked about entity on the planet. Blake was gone, swept away by the tide of change he had so desperately tried to stop. I saw him being escorted out of the summit by security, his face a mask of disbelief and rage. It wasn't triumph I felt, but a profound sadness for the man who had been so blinded by his sense of entitlement that he couldn't see the incredible opportunity he had been offered. Dr. Chun was immediately pulled into a huddle with the world's top climate scientist, the atmosphere electric with the shared goal of implementing a global restoration strategy. The technologies my grandfather had developed in secret were no longer just intellectual property. They were the shared inheritance of humanity. Later that evening, in a secure conference room deep within the UN building, the first emergency meeting of the new Global Restoration Coalition took place. Scientists, policymakers, community leaders, and myself, a history professor who had become a reluctant leader of a global movement, gathered around a massive table. "This changes everything," announced the UN Secretary General. but the challenges are immense. Implementation, resource allocation, political resistance. This will not be easy. Alina, my mother, stepped forward. My father anticipated these challenges, she said, producing a series of encrypted drives. He didn't just leave us technologies. He left us a roadmap. For the next 2 hours, we delved into my grandfather's true legacy. It wasn't just patents and research data. It was a comprehensive strategy for global transformation. He had identified key regions for initial restoration projects where the technologies could have the most immediate and visible impact. He'd created detailed financial models showing how the transition to a sustainable economy could be not just environmentally beneficial, but economically prosperous. He'd even outlined a plan for re-educating workforces from dying industries like oil and coal, ensuring a just transition for those who would be most affected by the change. But the most astonishing revelation was his human network, a carefully curated group of leaders across the globe who had been subtly cultivated by my grandfather for years. Some were scientists, others were community organizers, a few were even religious leaders. All had been chosen for their integrity, their vision, and their ability to inspire change within their own communities. The technologies are tools, a note from my grandfather explained. But the real work will be done by people. This network is the true engine of change. As I looked around the room, I realized that the past 15 years of my life, my academic career, my quiet life as a history professor, had been the perfect training. My grandfather hadn't just needed a CEO. He'd needed a storyteller, a person who could understand the complex historical forces at play and articulate a vision for a better future. The weight of responsibility was immense, but for the first time, I didn't feel alone. This wasn't just my inheritance, it was a shared mission. A young woman from a remote village in India, a community leader my grandfather had been secretly supporting for years, spoke up. "We are ready to begin," she said, her voice filled with hope. "Tell us how we can help." The energy in the room was palpable, a rare moment in human history when despair gives way to determination, when the impossible suddenly seems within reach. The following morning, I stood on the balcony of my hotel room, looking out at the Swiss Alps. The world felt different than it had just 24 hours before. My phone buzzed. A message from my Aunt Margaret. "I visited Richard's grave this morning. A small group of people had left flowers. Strangers. I think you would have liked that." Another message arrived. "Anne." Encrypted one from Alina. "The first implementation teams are on their way to the Amazon and the Sahara. The real work has begun." My grandfather's will had been more than a legal document. It had been a call to action, a challenge to reimagine what was possible. And as I stood there looking out at a world that suddenly felt full of hope, I knew all of us were ready to answer that call. The road ahead would be long and difficult. Political resistance would be fierce. There would be setbacks and challenges that my grandfather couldn't have anticipated, but for the first time in a long time, the future felt like something we were building, not just something that was happening to us. The final line of my grandfather's will had not just changed my life, it had changed the world. And this was only the beginning. 20 years after that life-changing will reading, the Hargrove legacy had transformed the world in ways no one could have anticipated. What had begun as a family conflict had become a global movement for environmental restoration. The Hargrove Environmental Research Center stood as a testament to my grandfather's Vision facility that had become the global standard for environmental technology and restoration. Where an oil refinery once stood, now existed a beacon of hope for planetary healing. Dr. Miranda Chun, now the lead global strategist for environmental restoration, presented our most comprehensive report yet. The technologies developed from my grandfather's secret archives had restored millions of acres of damaged ecosystem, reversed significant climate change impacts, and created new models of sustainable living. Richard Hargrove understood something most people missed. She told a global conference, "Environmental restoration isn't just about technology. It's about reimagining our relationship with the planet." Blake had become a key voice in international environmental policy, his transformation from corporate heir to environmental advocate complete. The family dynamics that had once been defined by conflict were now characterized by a shared mission. "I used to think inheritance was about money," Blake told me during a recent family gathering. "Now I understand it's about responsibility." My mother Alina had become a global leader in environmental journalism, using the platform created by our technologies to tell stories of environmental restoration and hope. Aunt Margaret, now in her 90s, remained a strategic advisor. Her understanding of both family dynamics and global environmental strategies continued to provide unique insights. The hidden archives continued to reveal my grandfather's extraordinary vision. Decades of research, carefully preserved technologies, a global network of environmental researchers and community leaders who had been quietly supported for years. International recognition had transformed Hargrove from a controversial oil company to the global leader in environmental restoration. The United Nations cited our work as the primary model for corporate environmental transformation. An unexpected breakthrough emerged from the final layers of my grandfather's archives technology that went far beyond environmental restoration. Potential solutions to global challenges that he had been developing in secret for decades. Some inheritance, a note in the archives read, are about more than money. They're about saving the planet. My phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. The legacy continues. The real work is just beginning. Standing in the research center that had once been an oil refinery, I reflected on the journey. The inheritance was never just about a company or wealth. It was a mission, a responsibility carefully protected and passed down through generations. My grandfather had seen something in me that the rest of the family had missed. Not just the ability to manage a business, but the vision to transform a mission into global change. As a new generation of Hargrove researchers prepared to take the stage, I understood the true meaning of inheritance. It wasn't about what you receive, but about the possibilities you create. Some inheritances come with responsibilities you can't imagine, and the real work is always just beginning. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to reflect on the legacies we inherit, not just material wealth, but the deeper missions and values passed down through generations. Consider the hidden technologies in your own life. What skills, insights, or passions have been quietly cultivated by those who came before you, waiting for the right moment to be fully realized? Remember that true inheritance isn't about money or assets, but about the vision and values that can transform lives. Like Thomas in our story, you may be carrying a legacy far more powerful than you realize. Ask yourself, what unspoken missions have been entrusted to you? How can you honor the deeper intentions of those who came before? What global challenges might you be uniquely positioned to address? Our story reveals critical lessons about inheritance. 1. Legacy is about transformation, not preservation. 2. True wealth lies in solving meaningful problems. 3. Family conflicts can be bridges to greater understanding. 4. One person's vision can change the world. The Hargrove story demonstrates that. Inheritance isn't just financial. Unexpected opportunities can emerge from family tensions. Personal growth often comes from challenging inherited narratives. Technology and vision can create massive positive change. Practical steps to uncover your own hidden legacy. Explore your family history. Ask older relatives about family stories. Look for patterns of passion and purpose. Be open to unexpected opportunities. Challenge inherited assumptions. Key takeaway: your greatest inheritance might be invisible. Family secrets can be transformative. Personal growth often comes from unexpected sources. Global change starts with individual vision. Challenge for our viewers: investigate your family's untold stories. Look beyond financial inheritance. Consider how your skills could solve larger problems. Be willing to reimagine your inherited narrative. Connect with us. Share your own inheritance stories in the comments. Subscribe for more narratives about unexpected legacy. Follow our channel for stories of personal and global transformation. Some inheritances come with responsibilities you can't imagine. Your legacy might be waiting to be discovered just beneath the surface of your current understanding. The real work is always just beginning.